If we're going to slide this transmission back, I think we want it to be elevated just a little bit. So I'm going to shim the engine up a little bit. I'll put the jack underneath the transmission again, and I'll jack up the transmission, and I'll put another board between that toolbox and the oil pan to get that transmission a little bit higher. And then we'll take the 4 bolts out and we'll slide the transmission back, and we need to slide the transmission back far enough so that we can get the bell housing off of there. Got the tail shaft raised up a little bit higher now above that cross support, and I've got the jack supporting the transmission so that when we slide the transmission back, I've got the jack positioned so we can slide back as well. Just set these wheels like that, so all the wheels are that way, and then I can just slide the whole thing to the rear. Just 4 bolts left, securing the transmission to the bell housing, and I got one on there right there, and of course the torque is impressive on these as well. So again, common trick with combination wrenches is give yourself just a little bit more leverage, some more mechanical advantage there. Put 2 of them together, and now you got, there you go, a lot easier to break torque. And then once you break the torque, then go ahead and just take that off. Using a 3/4 inch setup, I was able to take out those 4 bolts connecting the transmission to the bell housing, and I was able to slide the transmission back that far. And that's it. That's as far as we go. And I wish it would have went a little bit further, because that's what that looks like. I've still got the transmission in the shaft, and I was hoping to get it all the way out of the bell housing, but that didn't happen. There's 6 bolts that hold the bell housing to the engine block, and I was able to get all 6 of them with a 9/16 box end. 5 of them were easier from the top. One of them, the one down on the driver's side lowest, was easier from the bottom. The one nearest the starter gave me the most trouble, and they were all torqued pretty tight. So you know, I had to use the 9/16 box end and also a 5/8 box end on the other end to give me the leverage to break torque on all of them. So I got them all loose, and the only problem is there's some little small bolts right here that you need a 7/16 box end for, and one of them is right by the oil filter right here. So you can't get the box end on it, you can only get the flat on it. And I left it for last because I don't want to pull the oil filter off. So what I'm doing now is I got a pry bar, and I'm just kind of prying back on the bell housing as I loosen this up. And because you can't get the bolt, you know, to come out all the way, it hits the oil filter housing. So if I can't get the bolt out, I'll just pull the bell housing off of the bolt. You know, keep unscrewing the bolt, and finally the bell housing will just pop off, since that's the only thing left securing it on there. And then there's also this clutch fork spring right here. Your clutch fork is right here, and you got this spring. So I just connected the spring, and your rod for the clutch fork is right there, and that'll just drop straight down. I mean, he's got a safety wire on there, but I'll break that safety wire, and then I'll disconnect that. Yesterday the battery died on my camera, and while I was working on removing the bell housing, so I was able to disconnect the bell housing from the engine. I left the starter in, because on a Chevy, starter bolts to the block, not the bell housing, so that was nice. And took out the bell housing bolts, slid the bell housing back with the clutch fork and throwout bearing still in there. Once I had the bell housing back a few inches, or 6 inches or so away from the engine, I reached in there, pulled the throwout bearing out of the bell housing from the clutch fork, and then I took the bell housing and moved it all the way back onto the input shaft of the transmission, which is already sitting up in the car as we left it in the last video. So that gave me access to the pressure plate, and there's just 6 bolts that hold the pressure plate to the flywheel.
So took those out. There's a lock washer on each. My new kit comes with new bolts, so I don't need to hold on to those old ones that secure the pressure plate to the flywheel. So then I was able to drop the pressure plate away from the clutch disc, and then of course everything is kind of dropped to the ground. This is just sandwiched between the pressure plate and the flywheel. So the friction disc fell, and that fell, and that doesn't matter because that's all new in my kit. So I got a new clutch, a new pressure plate that I can install, and there's my flywheel. So I took out the 6 bolts that hold the flywheel to the crankshaft, and carefully removed, because it's heavy, carefully removed the flywheel from the crankshaft without putting my face underneath it, because you really don't want this thing to fall on your face. So anyway, now that I have the flywheel off of the engine, I can put that in the trunk of my car, and gotta go to work right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'll drop the flywheel off at the machine shop and get that turned, get it resurfaced, just like you would take your brake rotors in and get those turned, or brake drums and get those turned. They can put a brand new surface on that flywheel for me. And while the machine shop is doing that, I can get some parts cleaned up. Only after I dropped the pressure plate and the flywheel, only with the flywheel off, was I finally able to wrangle the bell housing out. So I had it, onto the input shaft of the transmission. So, I was able to slide it forward, and then I had just enough room between the input shaft of the transmission by angling the transmission just right. Which, remember, I had it secured on top of my jack stand so it wouldn't, fall or whatever. And with the flywheel out, I had enough space to get the bell housing out, which is good because I want to clean that up really good. You can see maybe how the clutch fork works there. There's the clutch fork, and there's the old throwout bearing, which we don't need to save because we got a new one of those. So I can get the bell housing cleaned up because it's really greasy, and I can get the inspection plate dust cover cleaned up that covers the bottom part like that. Get that cleaned up. Get the transmission cleaned up, and then once I get that flywheel back from the machine shop, start putting everything back together. I was able to get everything cleaned up as best I could, just using some engine degreaser and water and a little carb cleaner, B12 chem tool. Bell housing looks like that now. Flywheel looks like that. Let me try to clean this surface real good right here. You don't want anything right there where it mates to the crankshaft, and I cleaned the crankshaft as well at the back of the engine there. And then it's back from the machine shop, $35 to get it surfaced, so they took a few thousandths off of there, and now I got fresh metal. And cleaned and painted my bracket there, and cleaned and painted the dust cover there. Well, I've got it cleaned up. I went ahead and I looked at the part numbers on the transmission, serial number 5008. The original owner kept great documentation since day one. He bought the car brand new in May of '63. It was delivered in May. So most of my date codes, like this one here, are April '63 date codes. April '63 date codes. And I'm the second owner. The original owner who bought the car in May of '63 documented everything. I got most of that, and kept this logbook for the Muncie 4-speed transmission, '63 Corvette original transmission. For a while there, he had a Borg Warner T10 in this car, but he took that out in 1975, and he put the original Muncie back in, which I'm glad he did because now I've got it. But serial number 5008, which was on right there. And then he made a note, stamped P0508 at the rear of the side cover, down there, and the side cover is stamped 1707, which is right there, and the tail shaft is stamped 1731, which is right there, and the main case is stamped 1704, which is right there. So things like that are interesting. He was writing this way back when, and he didn't know I guess whether he had a close or a wide ratio. It's a 63 Corvette delivered in May. If it was an earlier Vette in 63, it would have had a Borg-Warner T10 stock, but it came with the Muncie. And since it's an L76 340 horsepower 327 from the factory, from what I gather, most of those came with close ratio 4-speeds. But he's got the 220, 164, 128, and 1:1 ratios for the close ratio transmission, and he's also got the wide ratio transmission gear ratios listed for first, second, third, and fourth gear. And then if you fast forward a few pages to where he had the transmission out, you can see where he started kind of playing with it, the input and output shaft, kind of watching him in first, second, third, and fourth gear. And on this particular transmission that we're looking at, he came up with 220 first gear, 164 second gear, 127 third gear, and 1:1 direct drive fourth gear. So that's the close ratio Muncie 4-speed, which is what should have come in this car, and it did. So that's nice. And then he's got a nice little Polaroid that he took in June of '82 of the Muncie 4-speed on his workbench. That's the last time this transmission was over.